This story is titled, My Sister-in-Law Falsely Accused Me of Having an Affair with Her and Tried to Destroy My Marriage and My Reputation, so I made it my mission to destroy her, and I did. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Never thought I'd be writing this, but my life's been wrecked by someone who had no business messing with me in the first place. My sister-in-law is 24. To give you some context, I'm 28 male, married to my wife 25 female, and we've been together for about 5 years, married for 2. My wife is my rock. She's kind, thoughtful, and the type of person who'd give you her last dollar if you needed it. She's the kind of person you'd be lucky to have by your side. And honestly, up until recently, I thought we had a pretty solid life together. We live in a small town where everyone knows everyone. I run a business here, and while it's not some big corporate empire, it's successful enough that people recognize my name. In a town like this, reputation matters, and I've worked hard to build mine. People trust me. They know I'm someone who keeps his word. That's what makes this whole mess with Esil so infuriating. She's been trying to tear me down with lies. And for what? Attention? Jealousy? I still don't fully understand her motives, but the damage she's tried to do is unreal. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags. My wife and her sister were never particularly close, which seemed odd to me at first. You'd think 2 siblings just a couple of years apart would have a good bond, but that wasn't the case. My wife explained early on that Esil had always been a bit difficult. She said Sil had a habit of making everything about her, even when it didn't need to be. In school, she would spread rumors about my wife to get attention. Things like, oh, she doesn't care about anyone but herself, or she bullied me for getting a better grade. It was like Sil couldn't stand seeing my wife succeed or be happy. My wife chalked it up to jealousy and tried not to let it bother her. At first, I didn't think much of it. Sil was her family, not mine, and I figured as long as she wasn't causing problems for me, it wasn't my business. But I started noticing things early on, little behaviors that made me uncomfortable. When my wife and I were still dating, Sil had this weird habit of inserting herself into our relationship. If my wife and I were out together, Sil would somehow coincidentally run into us. We'd be at a small cafe and she'd suddenly appear saying, "Oh, I didn't know you'd be here. Mind if I join?" It happened enough times that it stopped feeling like a coincidence. And then there were the texts. She'd send me these random messages. Nothing too inappropriate, but just weird. Things like, "You're such a great guy. My sister's lucky to have you." Or, "I hope you're doing well. Let me know if you ever need anything." At first, I thought she was just being friendly, but it felt off. Why was she texting me and not her sister? I'd usually ignore her messages, and that's when I noticed she'd delete them. I'd see the notification on my phone, but when I went back to check later, the message would be gone. It wasn't a one-time thing either. It happened enough to make me think she was trying to cover her tracks. I told my wife about the texts once, but she brushed it off, saying, "That's just how she is. She's always trying to insert herself into everything. Just ignore her." So I did. I ignored her texts, ignored her weird comments, and tried to focus on my relationship with my wife. Still, I kept my distance from Sil whenever possible. When my wife and I got engaged, Sil's behavior only got worse. It felt like she was always trying to create drama or make herself the center of attention. She'd make snarky comments like, "Oh, I can't believe you're settling down so young," or, "I hope you're ready for married life. It's not as easy as it looks." My wife would roll her eyes and tell me not to let it bother me, but it was clear that Sil wasn't exactly thrilled about our relationship. She'd even go out of her way to interrupt moments between us, like showing up at my house uninvited when I was planning a quiet evening with my fiancé. My wife saw it as her sister being clingy, but to me, it felt like something more. At one point, I started to wonder if Sil was jealous of my wife. It wasn't just our relationship she seemed to envy, it was everything about her. My wife has always been hardworking and independent, and Sil, well, she's kind of the opposite. She's the type of person who expects the world to cater to her, and when it doesn't, she acts like she's been wronged. My wife told me stories about how Sil would throw tantrums as a kid whenever my wife got something she wanted, like a new toy or praise from their parents. It was like she couldn't stand being outshined. Still, I didn't think it would escalate to anything serious. I thought Sil was just one of those people who always needed to feel important. Annoying, sure, but harmless. I couldn't have been more wrong. Fast forward to our wedding day. My wife and I were so excited to finally tie the knot, but of course Sil found a way to make it about her. She showed up in this bright, flashy dress that almost looked like a wedding gown. People even commented on it, asking if she'd misunderstood the dress code. My wife tried to laugh it off, but I could tell it bothered her. And that wasn't the only thing. During the reception, SIL kept trying to monopolize my time. She'd pull me aside to talk about random things, like her new job or her plans for the future. At one point, she even joked, "You better not forget about me now that you're married." It felt so out of place, but I just smiled and walked away. After the wedding, things calmed down for a while. SEL wasn't as involved in our lives, and I thought maybe she'd finally backed off. My wife and I settled into married life, and everything was great. We were happy, building our home together, and focusing on our future. SIL was still in the background, but she wasn't causing any problems. Or so I thought. I should have trusted my instincts. All those little red flags I ignored, they were just the beginning. I had no idea how far SIL was willing to go to involve herself into our lives and try to tear us apart. If I'd known then what I know now, I would have put up boundaries a lot sooner. But hindsight's 20/20, right? What I didn't realize was that SIL wasn't done with us. Far from it. She was just biding her time, waiting for the perfect opportunity to cause chaos. And when that opportunity came, she didn't hold back. When SIL moved into our home, I was already on edge. I didn't say anything outright to my wife because I didn't want to come off as unwelcoming or paranoid. My wife was already feeling bad for her sister. SEL had just gone through a nasty breakup, and she was clearly in a bad place emotionally. My wife, being the saint that she is, wanted to help her out, so she didn't think twice about offering SIL a room. For the first week or so, SEL kept a low profile. She mostly stayed in the guest room or watched TV in the living room, but it didn't take long for her true colors to come out. She had this way of always inserting herself where she didn't belong, like she was constantly trying to prove that she mattered more than she did. I should have said something sooner, but I didn't want to rock the boat. The tension started with small things. SIL would never give us space as a couple. If my wife and I were sitting together on the couch, she'd plop down right between us and start talking like we were all best friends. If we were having a quiet dinner, she'd make some excuse to sit down with us and tell us all about her day, even though we never asked. My wife brushed it off as SIL just being a little needy, but I knew it was more than that. It wasn't normal behavior, and it wasn't just us. SIL had this way of making herself the center of attention whenever we had guests over. I sometimes host dinners for friends from my business, either casual hangouts or networking events, and SIL would always manage to ruin the vibe. She'd come downstairs, dressed to the nines, and act like she was the star of the show. She'd laugh too loudly at jokes, interrupt conversations to talk about herself, and worst of all, she'd start asking my friends for their phone numbers. I remember one night in particular when she pulled that stunt. I'd invited 3 friends over, guys I've known for years and worked closely with. We were sitting in the dining room, having a good time, when SIL suddenly walked in and made a huge scene about accidentally spilling a drink on herself. She ran to the table with this over-the-top apology, acting like she was embarrassed but clearly enjoying the attention. Then she sat down with us uninvited, started flirting with one of my friends, and even asked for his number, in case she needed career advice. After the guests left, I pulled her and told her straight up, "This is my home and my business relationships. If you keep acting like this, you're going to have to leave." She immediately started crying, saying she didn't mean it, that she was just trying to fit in. My wife heard the commotion and came to see what was going on. I didn't want to upset her, so I downplayed it and let SEL off with a warning, but I was done giving her the benefit of the doubt. Then there were the messages. Sil had been texting me more often, and now it was getting harder to ignore. She wasn't just sending casual, "hope you're doing well" texts anymore. She started saying things like, "You're so easy to talk to," or, "I feel like you understand me better than anyone else." It was direct enough to be uncomfortable, but vague enough that she could claim she didn't mean anything by it if I called her out. But here's the kicker. She'd delete the messages right after sending them. Again. She must have thought she was being clever. But I wasn't stupid. It pissed me off, but I thought she would get bored if I ignored her and moved on. She didn't. One night, I was working late in my home office. My wife had already gone to bed, and I decided to take a break and grab something to eat. I walked into the kitchen and turned on the light, and there she was, standing by the fridge like she'd been waiting for me. I ignored her and opened the pantry, but then I felt her hand brush my arm. I turned around, and there she was, standing way too close, with this look on her face that made my skin crawl. "You work so hard," she said, her voice low and weirdly soft. "I wish I could help take care of you." I stepped back immediately, but she moved closer. She reached out and tried to touch my chest. That was it. I grabbed her wrist firmly, very angry, and barely containing myself. This is enough. You're way out of line. She froze, probably shocked that I wasn't just letting her get away with it. I wasn't done. I've ignored your messages, your stunts, and your disrespect in my own home. But this crosses the line. You're out of this house by tomorrow morning, and I'm telling your sister everything. Her eyes went wide and she started stammering. I didn't mean, but I cut her off. Number, don't even try to play the victim here. Pack your stuff, you're leaving. She tried to apologize, saying she was just lonely and didn't mean to make me uncomfortable. But I wasn't buying it. I walked away without saying another word, went back to my office and locked the door. I stayed up half the night, running through everything in my head. Part of me wanted to wake my wife up and tell her everything right then and there, but I decided to wait till the morning. I needed to make sure SEL was out of the house first. The next morning, I went to work as usual, knowing I'd deal with the situation once I got home. I needed time to tell my wife everything clearly and make sure SEL was out for good. I came home from work. I was in my office catching up on some work when I heard my wife's phone ring in the other room. It wasn't unusual for her to get calls from her family, so I didn't think much of it until I heard her voice get louder. She was saying, "Wait, what? That doesn't even make sense." I stopped what I was doing, walked into the living room, and saw her pacing back and forth, looking pale. I asked her what was going on, and she waved me off, mouthing, "It's SIL." I sat down, listening to her side of the conversation, saying something about needing to confess and feeling guilty. My wife was clearly trying to make sense of whatever SIL was saying, but her expression kept getting more confused and angry. Then she stopped pacing, looked at me and said, "I think you need to talk to her." She put the phone on speaker, and that's when I heard Sil's voice clearly. "I can't keep this secret anymore," she was sobbing. "It's been eating me alive, and I feel like I need to tell you the truth before it ruins me completely." "What are you talking about?" my wife asked, her tone sharp. SIL took a deep breath and said it. "Your husband and I had an affair when I was staying with you. He pursued me and I was weak after my breakup. I gave in, but I regret it so much. I'm so sorry." I froze. I don't think I've ever been that angry in my entire life. It wasn't just the lie. It was how casual and manipulative she sounded, like she was confessing something noble instead of blatantly fabricating the most insane story. "Are you serious right now?" I finally said. The phone went quiet for a second, and then SIL doubled down. "You can deny it all you want, but you know it's true. I just hope you can admit it to yourself one day." My wife hung up on her. For a second, neither of us said anything. I was fuming, pacing the room, trying to wrap my head around what just happened. Then, my wife spoke. "She's lying," she said firmly. "This doesn't even make sense." I looked at her surprised. "You believe me?" "Of course I believe you," she said, sitting down next to me. "She's been pulling crap like this for years. She used to lie about me all the time when we were kids, making up stories to get attention. I thought she'd grown out of it, but clearly not. Even though she said she believed me, I could tell it hurt her. Her own sister had just accused her husband of the worst thing imaginable. I wanted to fix it immediately, to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that SIL was lying. "Let me show you everything," I said. I pulled out my phone, opened up my messages, and scrolled through them. "There's nothing here because nothing ever happened. She's lying." My wife looked at the screen, nodding. "I know, but she's not going to stop. She wants attention, and she's willing to destroy us to get it." If Sil's accusation wasn't enough, she decided to go nuclear. A few days after her confession, my wife's parents called. They weren't just asking questions. They were demanding answers. "We've heard everything," my father-in-law said. "You need to leave that man. He's clearly controlling you, and now he's cheated on you with your own sister? This isn't love, honey." My wife tried to defend me. "Dad, it's not true. She's lying." But they didn't believe her. Sil had apparently gone to them, crying about how she'd felt trapped in the situation. She even claimed I was abusive, saying I would shout at her all the time and control what everyone in the house ate. It was absolutely ridiculous. Burned toast? He ruined the food on purpose to intimidate us. Grocery shopping? He controlled what we ate to show his dominance. Shouting down the stairs to find my phone? He yelled constantly, and we were all scared of him. It was laughable if it wasn't so infuriating. They started calling and texting my wife nonstop, pressuring her to leave me. They even went as far as calling my parents to warn them about what kind of person I supposedly was. That night, my wife and I sat down together and called my parents. We explained everything: the accusations, SIL's behavior, the messages she'd been sending. My parents were furious, but not at me. They knew SIL was lying and supported us 100%. My dad even said, if her parents want to believe that nonsense, that's on them. But you don't need to justify yourself to anyone. Once SIL realized her lies weren't tearing my marriage apart, she shifted her focus. It wasn't enough for her to make things awkward at home. Now she wanted to go after my reputation, starting with my work. She knew I valued my business and the relationships I'd built in the community, so she went for the jugular. At first, it was subtle. One of my business friends, Mark, called me out of the blue, sounding confused. Hey man, I wanted to check in with you. I ran into your sister-in-law at the coffee shop earlier today, and she said some interesting things about you. Immediately, my stomach dropped. What kind of things? I asked, already bracing for the worst. Mark hesitated before continuing. She was saying you're controlling at home and that things aren't good between you and your wife. She didn't outright say anything about cheating, but she hinted at some issues. I figured it didn't sound like you, so I wanted to ask. I was furious, but managed to keep my voice calm. Thanks for letting me know, Mark. It's all lies. She's been stirring up trouble because she's upset about being asked to leave our house. None of it's true. Mark immediately had my back. I thought it sounded off. Don't worry, I won't entertain it, but I'd keep an eye on her. She seems like she's trying to start something. I thanked him, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Sil had already caused enough chaos within my family, and now she was trying to drag my professional life into it. She was calculating, and she knew how important these relationships were to me. The final straw came when one of my biggest clients, Dave, pulled me aside after a meeting. Look, I don't want to overstep, he started, but someone's been saying things about you. I don't know what's going on, but I thought you should know. I asked him to explain, and he told me SEL had contacted him directly. She'd told him I was under a lot of stress and hinted that I wasn't managing my business well. She said she was concerned about you, but honestly, it felt like she was trying to undermine you, Dave said. It didn't sit right with me. That was it. I'd had enough. Sil wasn't just attacking me personally. She was coming after my livelihood. She thought she could destroy everything I'd worked for because she wasn't getting the attention or control she wanted. I sat down with my wife that night and told her everything. She's not just lying to hurt me, I said. She's trying to destroy my reputation. She's been talking to my friends and even my clients, spreading rumors and twisting the truth. I can't let her keep doing this. My wife nodded, her face hard with determination. We need to stop her. She's crossed too many lines. Together, we started gathering more evidence. I reached out to Mark and Dave, asking if they'd be willing to document their conversations with SL. They agreed. They didn't want to see her get away with this any more than I did. I hired someone to retrieve the deleted messages SEL had sent me. Sure enough, the texts painted a clear picture. She'd been sending me messages for months, trying to get closer to me, and deleting them when I didn't reply. There was nothing explicit, but it was enough to show her intentions. The security footage from the night in the kitchen was also included in the evidence. While it didn't show her exact words, it clearly demonstrated her invasive behavior and my attempt to shut it down. It backed up my timeline and refuted any claims she might make about my actions being inappropriate. Finally, my wife and I started digging into SIL's history. My wife talked to old friends, neighbors, even some extended family. The stories we uncovered were shocking. SIL had been lying to get attention for years, claiming she was bullied when she wasn't, faking illnesses, and even spreading rumors about people just to make herself look better. I called my lawyer the next morning and explained everything that had happened. I told him about SIL's false accusations, her messages, and her attempts to damage my professional relationships. My lawyer listened carefully and then laid out my options. What she's doing qualifies as defamation, he explained. If you have evidence of her lies and the harm they've caused, we can build a strong case. The first step would be to send her a cease and desist letter. If she doesn't stop, we'll file a lawsuit. I agreed immediately. My lawyer drafted a detailed cease and desist letter, outlining every instance of SIL's false claims and warning her that further actions would lead to legal consequences. The letter also demanded that she retract her statements to anyone she'd contacted. A week after SIL received the letter, I filed a defamation lawsuit. My lawyer told me it was a necessary step, not just to protect my business, but also to send a message that her behavior wouldn't be tolerated. When SIL found out about the lawsuit, she panicked. She called my wife, crying and begging her to make me stop. She claimed she never meant to hurt anyone and was just worried about our marriage. My wife didn't buy it. You're not worried about us, she told SIL coldly. You're trying to destroy us, and now you're facing the consequences. After that, Sil went quiet, at least for a little while. She stopped contacting my colleagues and clients, probably because she realized I wasn't bluffing. But it can't be undone. After months of stress, lies, and fighting to clear my name, the court finally ruled in my favor. SIL was found guilty of defamation and harassment. She was ordered to pay damages, issue formal retractions to the people she'd lied to, and slapped with a restraining order. For the first time in what felt like forever, my wife and I could breathe. But even though the legal battle was over, the fallout wasn't. SIL's lies had left cracks in my wife's relationship with her parents that couldn't easily be repaired. And honestly, I was done giving them the benefit of the doubt. It started almost immediately after SEL was served with the lawsuit. My wife's phone lit up with calls and messages from her parents. At first, they tried to play the sympathetic card, saying things like, "This is just a misunderstanding," or "She didn't mean any harm." But when we didn't respond, their tone quickly changed. But then it quickly became clear they weren't ready to let go of their skewed narrative. Instead of accepting the truth, they decided to shift the blame directly onto me. One evening, my father-in-law called while we were having dinner. My wife sighed and reluctantly answered, putting him on speakerphone so I could hear. "Sweetheart," he began, his voice filled with forced patience, "I just don't understand why you two are going through with this. This is family. You don't take family to court. Do you know what this is doing to all of us?" My wife kept her tone calm, but I could see the frustration on her face. "Dad, do you know what she did to us? She lied about my husband, tried to ruin his reputation, and spread disgusting rumors. Why should we let her get away with that?" "Because it's not worth tearing the family apart," he snapped. "You two are blowing this out of proportion. You should just talk it out like adults and move on. This lawsuit is going to destroy our family." I finally spoke up. "With all due respect, the family was already falling apart the moment you chose to believe Esil's lies instead of us. She's the one who caused this mess, not us. And the damage she's done to my life and my career isn't something I can just move on from." My father-in-law sighed heavily, clearly irritated. "You're being dramatic. She made a mistake, but dragging this out in court is only going to make things worse. Can't you see what this is doing to your wife? She doesn't need this stress." My wife cut in before I could respond. "No, Dad. What I don't need is you and Mom constantly defending her. She's a grown woman who made her choices. We're done letting her ruin our lives. This case is happening, whether you like it or not." A few days later, my mother-in-law called. Her tone was softer than her husband's, but the manipulation was the same. She began, "Can't we just sit down as a family and work this out? We've always been able to talk things through before. Why does this have to go to court?" "Because talking hasn't worked," my wife said firmly. "Every time we try to reason with her, she lies or twists the truth. We've given her chance after chance, and all she's done is double down on her lies. She's left us no choice." "But think about what this is doing to the family," her mom said, her voice trembling. "Your sister is devastated. She's made some bad decisions, but she's still your sister. Do you really want to be the reason this family falls apart?" I could see my wife's frustration bubbling over. "Mom, the family fell apart the second you and Dad believed her over me. You let her lies drive a wedge between us. And now you're blaming me and my husband for standing up for ourselves? How is that fair?" Her mom started to cry. "We just want things to go back to the way they were. Can't you see how much this is hurting everyone?" "No, Mom," my wife said, her voice sharp. "You want things to go back to the way they were because it's easier for you? It's easier to blame us than to admit you were wrong about her. But that's not happening. If you can't support us, then stop calling." When the guilt trips didn't work, my in-laws switched to threats. They started warning us about what would happen if we didn't drop the case. "Do you know how this will look to everyone?" my father-in-law said during one heated phone call. "People in town will start to think you're the problem, not her. Who takes their own sister-in-law to court? It's going to make your husband look petty and vindictive." I couldn't stay silent. "The only person who looks bad here is SEL, I said. "I have evidence proving she lied, harassed, and if someone is about to be judged, it's your daughter." "But think about how this will affect your wife," he fired back. "Do you really want to make her choose between her family and you?" My wife stepped in. "Dad, you've already put me in that position, and I'm choosing my husband because he's the only one who's been honest and supportive through all of this. If you're forcing me to pick sides, then you're not the family I thought you were." The final straw came when my in-laws showed up at our house uninvited. My wife and I were sitting in the living room when we heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find her parents standing there, looking determined. "We need to talk," her mom said, pushing past me into the house. "No, we don't," I said firmly. "We've made our position clear." My wife stood up, crossing her arms. "What are you doing here?" Her dad wasted no time. "We're here to talk some sense into you. This lawsuit has gone too far, and we're not leaving until you agree to drop it." My wife laughed bitterly. "You think you can just barge in here and tell me what to do? After everything you've said and done, you're lucky I'm even letting you in the door. Her mom's voice broke. Please, sweetheart. She's your sister. She's hurting. Hurting? My wife interrupted, her voice rising. Do you have any idea how much we've been hurting? She accused my husband of having an affair. She tried to ruin his business. She lied to everyone we know, and you two let her. And now you want to stand here and guilt me into protecting her? Number absolutely not. I stepped in. This conversation is over. You can either leave or we'll call the police. They finally left, but everything was already done. That was the moment we decided to go completely no contact. With my sister-in-law and her parents out of our lives, we finally found peace. The court case went forward, and SIL was ordered to pay for all the losses I incurred with my clients, around $83,000. We also got a restraining order against her. After that, everyone started giving her the silent treatment. Nobody wanted to talk to her. Eventually, she had to move away and live alone. Some people might say I was cruel, but honestly, that's what happens when you mess with me.